On the second page of your supplement, you have 4 paintings by 3 artists and some difficult material. You have 3 artists here who are addressing some issues and themes that are going to come up later in the semester. I know we're almost finished with the semester, but we still do have some things to talk about. And, some issues and themes that are going to come up under our discussion of postmodernism. Let's start with Marc Chagall's Green Violinist, figure A4 in your supplement. Marc Chagall's Green Violinist are on the screen there. One thing to note, is he a green violinist? Well, it depends on where you look. You see the green in the face and the right hand, but not the left hand. Chagall is convinced that part of our problem as a culture is that we aren't communicating effectively. The old ways of communicating don't work anymore. Whether we're talking about oral communication, like I'm speaking to you through this microphone, or visual communication in painting, or written communication in a book or something, that the old ways of communicating don't work anymore. Maybe our problem is that we aren't communicating effectively. For a period of time, Chagall experiments with a code of colors, not a secret code, that's the whole point, but he assigns values to different colors to see if there aren't other ways to communicate we haven't thought about yet. For Chagall, the color green is the color of mysticism, intense religious experience that can't be communicated in ordinary language. Once we know that, we can figure out what's going on in the painting. Here you have a violinist. He's swept up in his music. As he performs his music, all that matters to him is the music and the experience of living in the music. Up above him, this more youthful figure with the same color connection down to the violinist floating through the air. Maybe the soul or spirit set free by the music, as the rest of the world just falls away from the violinist. The costuming and the setting here influenced by Chagall's childhood growing up in a Russian Jewish village. If you've seen Fiddler on the Roof, the movie or the play, you may have some insight into Russian Jewish culture. It's an interesting subculture. Russian Jewish people are different from other Jewish people, different from other Russian people. It's an interesting kind of subculture. And that might help you remember it, because we do kind of have a Fiddler on the Roof here. Chagall, heavily persecuted by the Soviet Union, by the communist government in the Soviet Union. You can't be painting these kind of paintings and asking these kind of questions in a communist country. It flies right in the face to Marxist philosophy. And eventually was exiled, made a career first in France and then in the United States. His Russian paintings were confiscated and seen as so dangerous to society that they were locked up in the basement of KGB headquarters, believe it or not, in Moscow, so that nobody could see them and be polluted by them. Well, with the collapse of communism, what's it been now, about 20 years, the paintings were released, and a lot of interest in Chagall, because what Chagall is getting at here is an issue of communication that, we'll be talking about later. There's going to be an increasing concern over the problem of communication. It's going to come up later. Also on that page there, you have figure A5, a painting by an artist named Mondrian. Mondrian's color planes and oval. Figure A5 in your textbook. If you don't understand what Mondrian is doing here, the temptation is to see Mondrian there with an easel set up and a canvas and some paintbrushes, and Mondrian says, well, I've got some orange paint, so I'll make an orange square over here, and I got some black paint, so I'll draw a line over here, and I got some blue paint, so I'll make a blue rectangle over here, and so on. I know that's what it looks like, but I can assure you that's not what's going on here. Now, there are paintings where the painting ends up on the canvas almost by accident, wherever the painter wants them to go, or even at accident, but that's not what's going on here. We'll catch up to those paintings later on in the semester, but that's not what's going on here. What you see, as hard as it might be to believe at first, is an attempt to paint mathematics. Mondrian is attempting to paint mathematics. He assigns mathematical values, assigns values of color and location and size and shape to different mathematical values, and then works a math problem. And as those values come up in the math program, that tells him where to put the brush and what size and shape to make the image on the canvas. This might help you. It works kind of like a screensaver on your computer. your computer goes into hibernation mode or whatever, and that screensaver thing comes up. Well, that's because a computer program begins running through a mathematical problem, a mathematical program assigning the cursor to move or the pixels to light up or whatever on the screen. What we have here is a slow motion screensaver program where the mathematics is driving the location and placement, size and shape, color of the paint placed to the canvas. What we have in this painting is a pretty elaborate mathematical formula. I've got another one here, composition, from 1921, that maybe intuitively you may pick up on some of the mathematics here because they're mathematics that you've encountered throughout your entire life. Mondrian is working here with a series of numbers called Fibonacci numbers. You can jot it down if you're going to be, well, jot it down, you might be interested. It's Fibonacci, Fibonacci numbers. I'm going to show you where Fibonacci numbers come from and how you can set them up visually and mathematically, visually and physically, where you can show you how you can mathematically and physically replicate the mathematics. I think I got that straight, because I'm not a math teacher. Okay, so don't ask me any questions about this stuff. All right, but I was going to show you where some of the how the math is working here. I had a math teacher in high school, Mr. Smith. Mark Smith was his name, and we really didn't like him. It turned out he was a good teacher, but he would drive us nuts because he would tell us something that just drove us silly. He would say the key to learning mathematics is that you don't have to understand it. You just have to do it. And if you do it long enough, then you'll come to understand it. It would drive us nuts because we'd be working up to had him for algebra, and he'd be driving us nuts, and he'd say you don't have to understand it. As it turns out, he was right. He was right. He was a good teacher. He drove us nuts, but he was a good teacher. So you don't have to understand any of this. Okay, just follow along with me, and eventually you'll pick it up. Fibonacci numbers come from a series of numbers. You start off with the number 1. You move that 1 over here. You add 1 to the 1. You get 2. You move that 2 over here. You bring the 1 down here. Add the 2 and the 1. You get 3. You move the 3 over here. You move the 2 over here, you add the 3 and the 2 together, and you get 5. Now, who would take their time doing this kind of thing? Mathematicians, I guess. You'd move the 5 over here, you drop the 3 down here, you add the 5 and the 3 together, you get 8. You move the 8 over here, you drop the 5 down here, you add the 8 and the 5 together, you get 13. Move the 13 down here, move the 8 over here, you add the 13 and the 8 together, and you get 21, and so on. Well, this series of numbers over here, let me get my pen going. This series of numbers starts off with the Fibonacci sequence, which goes on to infinity. There are all kinds of interesting things about the Fibonacci numbers. One thing is, as you start moving down through the sequence, you begin dividing 2 by 3, dividing 3 by 5, dividing 5 by 8, dividing 8 by 13. You start to move closer and closer to a number. 1.618 or the square root of 2. You get closer and closer to the square root of 2. If you set up a rectangle whose ratios are in the ratio of the square root of 1 to the square root of 2, you get what's sometimes called the golden rectangle. That's what this rectangular shape is here. The ratio of the square root of 1 to the square root of 2. What's the square root of 1? 1. So the square root of 1, the ratio of 1 to 1.618, or the square root of 1 to the square root of 2. There's a number of ways that physically you can come up with a golden rectangle. You start off with a square. You divide that square in half. You draw a line from the corner of the half up to the other half, and you drop that down. And you measure it out, and you get, as you see down here, the golden rectangle. Excuse me. You can set up the golden rectangle in a series of spaces set by Fibonacci numbers into a spiral. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, and so on. Sets it up into a spiral. Now again, you don't have to understand this, just follow along with me. Because once you've done the mathematics, and the mathematicians are much better at doing this than I am, then you can start, well, this stuff shows up all over the place. On pineapples, the pointy parts of pineapples are always in Fibonacci numbers, and the spirals are set themselves up as Fibonacci spirals. The pointy parts on pine cones always equal Fibonacci numbers, and they ascend in spirals set by Fibonacci spirals. Those Fibonacci numbers show up on your hands in all kinds of places in the human body, but in your finger, the ratio 2 to 3 to 5 to 8 and so on work down through your hands. The spirals in the cone of the seeds in the cone of a sunflower actually have two different spirals spiraling in different directions. That Fibonacci spiral, where is it going back here? Back here, the spiral here is found in just about all curled seashells. The human eye has always found the golden rectangle attractive. It shows up in several areas in painting. The face of the Mona Lisa fits into a golden rectangle. The whole floor plan and the frontal part of the Parthenon in Athens fits into a golden rectangle, and in fact the parts of it fit very nicely into a Fibonacci spiral. Because for some reason we tend to find this thing attractive, it shows up in marketing and advertising quite often. The old National Geographic size was set in the golden rectangle. The old-fashioned monitor, doesn't sound funny to say, because monitors are getting wider screens today, but the traditional standard monitor size is set up as a golden rectangle. The golden rectangle is the size of the credit card, or the ratio, I should say, the ratio of the credit cards in your pocket, the ratio of your standard cigarette pack. Golden rectangles show up all over the place, both in nature and in the ordinary world. That sounded funny, didn't it? When Twitter reorganized its webpage recently, it set itself up intentionally as a Fibonacci spiral. They show up all over the place. And we see, for example, golden rectangles here, over here, and the unfolding of the rectangles into squares and so on is set up in a Fibonacci cycle. Here's another example of Mondrian's work that you don't have in your textbook, but there's a golden rectangle here. Here you see a number of them divided up in all kinds of different ways. These two rectangles together form a golden rectangle, and then he sets these rectangles up into a spiral that matches the Fibonacci spiral. Mondrian's work is influential in geography and architecture. All kinds of different ways. They show up in. Mondrian becomes popular with fashion designers every few years, and for a few years we're tortured with things like this. And then, thank goodness, they go out of style. But once you learn what Mondrian stuff looks like, you'll see them quite often. Interior designers use them for tile design on floors or the walls of showers and all kinds of things. If you're into architecture, building construction, civil engineering, graphic design, interior design, fashion design, well, you're going to be learning a lot more about Mondrian. What you see is set by mathematics. On that same page you have the artist Kandinsky, figure A6, several spheres. Mondrian and Kandinsky are both doing the same thing. They're both influenced by a movement called Theosophy. You don't need to worry about getting that word down. But it's a movement which tried to inject more rationality into society by painting mathematics. Mondrian and Kandinsky, who wrote books about what they were trying to do. Mondrian and Kandinsky are saying maybe our problem as a society is that we aren't being rational enough. And by painting mathematics, by designing furniture and buildings to reflect mathematics, maybe we can inject more mathematics into society. Maybe our problem is that we aren't being rational enough. But this is about the last gasp of rationalism in the course, about the last gasp of rationalism we're going to see in Western culture, because part of the response to this cultural crisis is to move away from a focus on rationalism, that old value that comes to us out of Athens, and a move towards the irrational, mind. And we'll pick up with that pretty quickly with the next artist we're going to be looking at.